Well, my mom, she jokes around. She's like, well, why don't you drug test everybody? I said, Mom, if I do that, I'm literally going to have 5 people working in my office at the end of the day. Of course, I'm back with additional valet stories. Now, this one's going to hit home a little bit differently. And often I'm asked, hey, Alex, at what age do you start hiring people? We have a very strict policy. We try to do 20 and above. And people are like, well, why don't you hire 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds? They have their driver's license at 15. And I said, you know what? You're right, but it's not just based on a driver's license. It's also based on maturity and making proper decisions. You're driving people's $100,000 vehicles, and you have to be careful in doing so. So a lot of times I'm very restrictive, and even our insurance states that they want at least 21. I talked them into 20 and above, and they're okay with that. But of course, I like use your discretion based on that, because at that point, your second year in college, you should be mature enough to be able to drive vehicles properly. Well, the next story I bring you has actually landed on my desk like 3 or 4 times, and I got consulted with it because there was a major devastation that happened in Houston back last year. A company hired a valet who happened to be 17 years old. Now, please kind of picture this scenario. In the world of valet parking, what we do, we have the restaurant parking, but sometimes the parking lot might not be enough for the cars that might come in throughout the night. So we have satellite parking lots. And sometimes they could be a quarter of a mile up the road, and that's why you hire young guys that can run back and forth. So we have this situation where there's a restaurant here, and there's an opposing restaurant here, no relation to each other, and ironically have 2 different valet companies that are employed for both, which happens. We all get along great, but they just happen to employ 2 different valet companies. Well, this one valet, the 17-year-old, decided to take a G35 or a G37 to the satellite parking lot. Once he got into that parking lot, he started doing donuts. And in doing so, he caught the attention of a sergeant driving by. So of course the cop pulls in, tries to pull over that particular car, not knowing that he's a valet, and this valet takes off. He takes off and he starts speeding. He speeds up the road doing about 50, 60 miles per hour, turns around and comes back because he's going back to the original restaurant on the right side. But in doing so, the opposing valet company, once you park those cars, you jog back to your restaurant. This valet ends up slamming into all 3 of those valets, killing them. In doing so, he ended up flipping over the car. He was in the car himself with another 17-year-old valet, and both of their legs are broken. So this is now turning into a major event. How did this happen? What caused it? Who's at fault? Is it the police fault? Is it the valet's company? Is it the restaurant's fault? Or is it the individual's fault? Unfortunately, the 3 people that died were very nice guys. I think they were 19, 22, and 23 years old. So they were great individuals that unfortunately lost their life almost immediately. There was a big ruckus that happened. It got to the point where the original owner of the white Infiniti G35, G37 came out, and he didn't even realize. He saw the accident and didn't realize that was his vehicle that was mangled up against the pole. They said he was going 60 miles per hour. Honestly, it leads me to believe he was going much faster than that, because the way this car was wrecked and flipped over, I think he was going probably, I'm not an expert, but I would say at least 80 plus. So, of course, this is now getting really serious. The kid ends up going to court. His bail is now $350,000. $100,000 per life he took, plus $50,000 for the passenger that he injured. Of course, they don't have the money to do that, and even if you get a bail bondsman, that's $35,000 cash for the most part that you have to come up with. Don't ask me how I know. It's to the point where this guy's now in jail, and he's probably going to do some serious time because of this. Now, the families of the 3 individuals are going to sue, naturally. But who did they sue? Unfortunately, it's going to be the restaurant, of course. It's going to be the valet company, of course. The valet company is trying to say, hey, this guy was never employed for us in the first place, but honestly, it's BS. He's trying to cover his bases, but it's not going to matter in the first place. They're going to actually be able to sue the owner of the vehicle because they're just trying to attach themselves to any insurance policies that can pay out. Unfortunately, here in the US, that's what happens. So they're literally going to look for money wherever they can look for it at. They're going to try to sue, obviously, the individual valet, but if he doesn't have much, what are they going to get? Honestly, it's like squeezing blood from a turnip. and they're going to go after everybody. They're probably going to try to sue the police department for negligence for chasing after something for such a minor event. So this is really devastating. So people ask me over and over, why don't you hire young people? And this is the reason why. And this is not the only example. I have personal examples of myself of young valets who I have hired who have been brothers of other valets that have made dumb decisions. And once out of every 100, I think you can say, you'll find some really mature people, but is that really worth the risk when you're in this line of work? This is something very serious, and this is something we don't play with. So that's why we say we can't hire young people. So the principle behind all of this breaks down to you as an employee. Me, myself, I'm an employee, and of course, I'm an entrepreneur in this industry. And my net worth is based on basically the hands of these young employees. I tell my employees all the time, hey, you don't realize that I have a 20-year-old driving a $100,000 car. Who's liable for that? I am, and I can't take that risk. That's why I'm very particular about knowing everything about my valets as much as possible. I want to know their personal lives. I even want to know to the point, and I have to be stupid to not assume that these guys are smoking or drinking or something like that, but I have to try to minimize that as much as possible and tell them to be responsible while they're here, because ultimately I'm responsible. Well, my mom, she jokes around. She's like, well, why don't you drug test everybody? I said, Mom, if I do that, I'm literally going to have 5 people working in my office at the end of the day. It doesn't work that way. So I just try to have them be as responsible as possible. But in particular cases like this, where this other valet company that's in Houston, he has now 3 wrongful death suits against him. And if he's not protected properly, either A, through insurance, and honestly, if his insurance finds out he hired underage, they're going to look for a reason not to have coverage. Number 2, they're going to go after him personally, depending on how he's protected legally through the corporation. If he does an LLC, LLC stands for Limited Liability Corporation. He doesn't have enough coverage, so they're going to go after him personally. And that's why this becomes dangerous. Everybody thinks, oh yeah, let me start a valet company, or let me start this other company. I can make great money. But when I come in and I'm consulting with people, I'm explaining to them the full liability that's behind the door. Because honestly, I've gotten calls at least once a month from new people trying to start valet companies. But as soon as I explain that to them, they're like, oh, I didn't really think about that part. And when you see that you can literally have a death involved, they're going to come after you. Let's say, God forbid, or one of these guys was a father. He now cannot provide for his child or his wife. And who do you think they're going to come after for that? You. So that's why you have to be very careful when you think about these things moving forward.
5 years ago, the first sponsor we ever had here on the VINwiki channel was Caffeine and Octane. Now, they're our local Atlanta Cars and Coffee meetup that I've been going to for 15 or so years now, but it is now the largest monthly recurring automotive gathering on Earth. Now, you'll also recognize Caffeine and Octane from their television show, and the next season of that airs very soon on Motor Trend. In their quest for further automotive world domination, they just bought the legendary Lanier Motor Speedway, which is across the street from Road Atlanta. So throughout the next year, we're going to have a lot of amazing events there that you'll be invited to join. But the coolest project they've deployed lately is called HighOctane.tv, and it's a free streaming network that you can access from any smart TV, Roku, Fire Stick, smartphone, or a computer, and it'll give you access to a ton of programming, including all 5 seasons of their show, some content from creators we love like David Patterson, That Dude in Blue, and a ton more. Soon there will be some content from VINwiki on there as well. So visit the link in the description below to learn more about the amazing world of Caffeine and Octane.